It's a show. So, welcome to the seventh day. And if you're talking German, vielen Dank, dass ihr durchgehalten sind. Anyway, so I'm so happy that all you more serious philosophy students, and you're continuing this, attending this lecture series, which is on the seventh day now. So today he will continue with the same subject as he has discussed yesterday, the ontological problems of complex phenomena, the concept of emergence. There's slight change in the program because we have to meet the Vice Chancellor today. So we will stop at 3:20, then we will go. You'll have a kind of long break, and hopefully we'll be back by 4 o'clock for the discussion and the workshop and all. So, first two.
So, thank you so much. So we will just continue in exploring the ontological problem of complex phenomena, and in particular the concept of emergence and reduction, what would be useful not only tomorrow, but even after tomorrow, in order to explain how important it is to conceive the world as complex, more as simple, for education and for our even practical existential approach to the world. So this lecture will be split in two parts, as Babu said, because we have a meeting with the presidents of the university. These two parts will help to understand just another shape of something that we cannot have in mind or have in sight till today, but we demand a sort of maximal effort of imagination. In what sense? Of course, we will maybe not use in the future the model I present, okay? Or will not reach the debate on modeling ontologies in meta-ontology and so on and so on. But just to make the effort or struggle with new representation, it was determines that we have a new side. So the effort of imagination that we will encounter as need in a certain point of the lecture would help then look at things in another way. Why? Because even if not fully understood, we acknowledge that such things that we call complex system can be only grasped in their complexity, and then can be only determined, can be only encompassed with a shape that is not the shape that we get either for our normal perception, either or from the common scientific education that we get along our schooling. Okay? Just for the moment, I prepare your mind to this effort. Just keep in mind what we said, or reactivate what we say about many dimensionality, or the multidimensionality, and what we said about attractor. So attractors are shapes, visible shapes, but they are not in the real world. Arise from an epistemical approach that gives concreteness to something that is not the visible, or not the visible in the sense of the perceptible. And that rejoin also the suggestion or the project we met in Merleau-Ponty quotes. This is, let's think being with topological space. That the being of perspective is dry-dimensional, and so on, and so on, okay? These three elements. So what Merleau-Ponty enhanced, that is a very, very maximal thing. Let's think being by topological space or as topological space is not something so neutral from the point of view of ontology, phenomenology, of course, ontology, and first philosophy. So it's not needed to know the work of Merleau-Ponty, but it's his last book, The Visible and the Invisible, with the idea of the chiasm proposed or sketches, because the work is unaccomplished, sketch something for the future. And working, so we can take it poetically. Okay, I think it topologically. But when we ask us, and I ask to me, of course, how we can think the being topologically or by the means of topological space. The development is more difficult as it can look like, okay? Because beyond the work or beyond this wishful thinking, maybe we can arrive to change our view on visible and reach the invisible stuff or the invisible body of the world by changing our way to view at something, okay? But this reaching is more difficult as it looks like when we will grasp what it's matter of and not just enhance word in order to let the impression to the others that we think different, okay? So these three elements are important, will be important at a certain point. Let's recover firstly what we said yesterday. We can conceive the formal ontology as a synthetic system, as a class of rules that provide the structure of apophantic determination of object as object or of something as something in their formal structure. We said yesterday without color. Anyway. Similarly, we can also define regional material ontologies as semantic systems providing to present the representative content of certain classes of being, each time integrated to the formal structure of objects. And as we said, by articulating formal ontology and regular ontology, we have a sort of theory of object in one kind, okay? One kind of objects is determinable or just fixable if we articulate the grammar of formal ontology or the syntax of formal ontology and the semantic of regional ontologies. So in phenomenology, regional ontology at least is more loaded of philosophical meanings as just syntax, okay? Regional ontology have a genesis, regional ontology have a sedimentations, and so on and so on. There is not just a semantic that we can decide, okay? Semantic is, for a phenomenological point of view, just a rude abstraction of what are the noemata and the idealities of regional ontology and material ontology as such. But anyway, we have a certain correspondence. As said also, if a certain manifestation A is supposed to be determinable by this class of formal predicates FO, F1, F2, F3, Fn, and by a certain class of empirical or regional predicates, R1, R2, R3, Rn, in the complex phenomena there is at least a property Ax that can't be determined by the Cartesian articulation between FO and RO. from a mental theoretical perspective, it can be assumed that formal ontology only provides a form of a theory whatsoever, whereas regional ontology implements this empty form with a concrete framework of that theory. Formal ontology, regional material ontology, in Husserl's phenomenological language, grammar and ideology entwine, but must be integrated with another fundamental element, one that gives ontology its capacity to present the word image that, or objective world that they intend. That is, we have to be able to re-encounter or encounter in the world something corresponding to that shape of object. So if the coupling between regional ontology and formal ontology can be named a theory of object, okay? It cannot be named, strictly speaking, an ontology, because an ontology must have a class of ontological commitments, okay? That is, that's what I mean, what I intend, exists precisely there. And if you remember, intervenes with this matter of identification or individuation, okay? What Quine says, space-time complements or intuitive complements, okay? Originäre gebende Anschauung by Husserl. We cannot phantasm ontologies in the sense, if you will, of Menangianism without say which ontology correspond to forms of individuation in analytic language, or instantiation, or forms of intuition in phenomenology, okay? Or forms of giveness, okay? Gegebenheit. So an ontology, rarely speaking, can be individuated by at least three dimensions. The dimension of formal ontology, in which we find predicates of something in general. Regional ontology, when these forms take the shape of concrete predicates of something, the semantic, and PI, what they say, there's this, or protocol Sätze, that's what pertains to a very, very large debate in analytic philosophy, or forms of intuition, okay? What instantiate the shape of this objective world, and let us say, okay, this is what I intend for force, that is what I intend for isochronism, that was I intend for material body, that was I intend for human, and so on, and so on. So, a theory of object is not an ontology without forms of instantiation. So we have no ontology in two dimensions. Two dimensions, we are only images. Okay? So the idea was, at the beginning, you cannot find that in other kinds of literature, so I will not appear novel, but it's so. The idea is, by thinking on Riemann, we already mentioned, and we're thinking on many stuffs that we mentioned earlier, the idea is, we modeled at the beginning object as tridimensional. Why we don't model ontologies as tridimensional? So every form of metaphysics or every form of ontology we find in the history of ontology can be modeled in this way. So it's just a three-dimensional ontology. So, and then what say metaphysics is securing that this must be the form and the only possible form of existing object. Okay? And if you will, we have a coupling of two theories, okay? A theories of pure logic in the traditional way, pure logic as formal ontology, or pure apophantics as formal ontology, theory of judgment. We have the concept that they are applied for, and then, or substance predicate in the form of metaphysics of Aristotle, then you have the particular genus and species structures, and then we have what Aristotle has a bit mysteriously named todeti. Todeti is a sort of indexical expression, the singularity I can point out with my finger. We can find, in the history of metaphysics, we can find forms of variation of three-dimensional modelable ontologies and forms of metaphysics. The question was, and the question is, why we don't think a many-dimensional form of ontology. Why meta-ontology can limitate itself just to this elemental shape of ontological approach to the world. So, if it's happened with space, because it cannot with spatial modelization or the modeling of ontology. And this complex system give appeal to it, because as we read and we heard in the earlier days, we have to do with many folds of ontological kinds and many folds of natural kinds. We can represent a system of ontological determination, each ontology composed by a formal regional ontological commitment, as a particular view or dimension that describes a well-defined portion of the horizon of phenomenality. Excuse me, the triviality is not so trivial, if I will say, but at this point of your journey can also appear trivial, okay? That describes a well-defined portion of the horizon of phenomenality. However, this issue reveals another property which is not an ontological core essential property of complexity, but rather a property characteristic of each system of ontological determination as such, is relativity. In this way, rejoining Quine, but also, if you will, rejoining Husserl, okay? Ontologies are relative. The only problem is that with complexity, this relativity, as said yesterday, converge to a concretion. We have a concrete, ontologically plural something. What is just a bit puzzling. Thus we arrive at the second principle of our approach, which is the principle of meta-ontology. An ontology that provides a treatment of information that simultaneously produces an object image, an ontological image, an image of being something essentially partial and relative. Okay? This is the principle of meta-ontology as such in a pure descriptive way, as we said yesterday. Not by chance, the slide belong or should belong to the lesson of yesterday. We took a bit more time in order to explain. Meta-ontology, by the essays of Van Wagen, according Van Wagen, is neither an object. We have no a meta-ontology in the sense of higher ordered ontology, because we can find in a regressus and to infinitum, okay? Why not a meta-meta ontology? Why not a meta-meta-meta-meta ontology, and so on and so on? And the problem I treated is just a bit more technical, but you can easily understand if you conceive that a meta-ontology is a sort of meta-ontological construct, you cannot end, so your procedure falls in a sort of regress in infinite. Neither an object nor a theory of higher order, but rather a cognitive space, a space in which we approach and we model, okay, without special speculative claims, something that we encounter in our works on concepts and problems of knowledge, of living, and so on, and so on. It is within this space that we see, we observe and describe the different structures as well as the different kinds of ontological images, among which we also find many different configurations of ontology. Meta-ontology is not synonymous with meta-theory, is an application of meta-theory to the problem of determination of being. Let's rejoin what we said before yesterday. Firstly, by the attractor spaces, okay? And secondly, by the shift between theory, model, and determination, okay? Firstly, let's think to these ontological images, not ontic images. It's not the pictured representation of something. It's not the picture of the Gioconda, or the Mona Lisa, or the picture of something, or even a pic taken by satellite. Okay? This ontological image can be also named, if you will, ontological attractor. That is, we represent what it is to put some data organized in another form. And the data are not the data that we catch in reality this time, because we are in meta-ontology. It's just a sort of what lies at the ground of theories in order to say something about the things, okay? As we said yesterday at the beginning. So a theory contains necessarily an ontology, even that the theoretician is not aware of the fact. So, speaking about objects presupposes, implicitly or not, that we get an ontology in order to speak about object. Even the indigenous claiming Gavagai and pointing out something on the perceptual space corresponding to the Gavagai, that is the implicit thesis of Quine, get an ontology. Okay? And the ontological image or the ontological attractor is just the way we, from a meta-ontological perspective, abstract all that in order to visualize it more clearly from a logical and from an intuitive point of view. For this reason, the words, or the two words to mention, to have to do with attractors is essential, because attractors are nowhere, in the sense that we cannot point an attractor in the space. The line of the attractor is not the trajectory of the body in the system, but nevertheless, it belongs intrinsically to the system. Okay? It's the result to view the system from a background that is not that of the theoretical, practical individuation of the thing, but a sort of general behavior of the whole. Okay? The ontological image, and, or maybe also what we named ontological attractor, in its partiality, it what gives to us the clear sight of what an ontology is talking about. Okay? It can happen also from historical ontology. Even with historical ontologies, we have to do with text and so on and so on. we can retranslate these historical ontologies and watch concretely of what is about. For example, the ontology, let's say the ontology of early atomism by Democritus, okay, is not the same ontological image as the ontology by Aristotle. If you will, with some care, or carefully speaking, the ontology of Spinoza or the ontology of Leibniz are not the same ontological, have not the same ontological image or the same ontological attractor as the ontology of Descartes, of the ontology of Scotus, or Scott. Okay, this is, in principle, is possible. That is the royal way of knowledge, to abstract essential features, okay, and to look, to compare by variances and invariances. We do that, we know to do that thanks to the logic with theories. So the meta theory is the capacity to give to us, ourselves, the clear view how the theories are changing. We have, in principle, the same possibility with ontologies, with the key concept that we name ontological image or ontological attractor, okay? That is not a Weltbild. When we can ask retrospectively, an ontological image become a word image? When there is a metaphysics that says there is no relativity, that ontological image, that ontological attractor, even not clearly spoken, is the one possible for a word. What happens with quantum mechanics and the debate of Weltbild we approaches in the fourth lesson is that some will say, no, we have two complementary word images. So the word images are two, let me translate in my language, two ontological images, but there is no metaphysics that can claim that one of two is the one unique possible form of a word. We don't think about many possible words, okay? A many possible approach to the world of word view that now, after what we mentioned, can no longer claim the exclusivity to catch the whole, just in this way, okay? And for to that we come to the second point. Meta-ontology is not synonymous of meta-theory. It's an application of meta-theory to the problem of determination of being. So meta-theory can just study structurally how scientific theories, or even not scientific theories, okay, looks like. So what are the essential features, what is the variances among theories? For example, even inside the model is not exactly Lagrange mechanics, is not exactly Hamilton mechanics, okay? Even thermodynamics, the early thermodynamics is not exactly the thermodynamics, statistical thermodynamics after Boltzmann, and so on and so on. Even theory of rights, and so on and so on. So meta-theory is not concerned at all, should be not concerned with ontologies. So take the ontology as necessarily belonging of the theories it considers, because instead the theories are speaking about nothing. It's impossible, okay? So ontology is sort of step forwards. What theories, or in which way theories engage, commit themselves to say there is something or there is not something. That is responding to the thing what there is or not. Okay? there is no angel, for example. There is no angel or demon in Cartesian ontologies. Okay? There is no crystal spheres orbitating in Cartesian ontologies, or extension, masses, force, and so on and so on. The ontological image of the world, and meta-ontologically speaking, the ontological attractor is quite different. Okay? But there is no, for example, as we mentioned, living bodies. Living bodies being reduced to machines does not pertain to the ontological image of Cartesianism. So, if you will, it's just a tool to make you clear that the ontological attractor of Cartesianism looks very different from the ontological attractor of any paradigmatical theory, of any particle theory. Okay? There is not something that we can find in the many, this very fine illustration of the Principia Philosophiae by Descartes, or the Principia Mathematica by Newton, of an herbarium by Paracelsus, and so on and so on, or in the books that we name it in the name of the rose, a sort a concrete depicted image, okay? It's like an attractor that hang together every different spares claims about what is existing or not. And now we notice that such images are historically and structurally relative. There is, for the moment, there is no possible metaphysics that can say that ontological image, that ontological attractor is the shape of the whole world. Okay? For this reason, in recent debates of ontology, we began to speak of meta-ontology or meta-metaphysics, or meta-metaphysics as a say to foundation of ontology, like a very, very interesting book published in 2011 or something like that. The question?
Yeah. It means if we consider the ontology in terms of the hierarchical structure, so we have the upper level and the middle level and the ground level of hierarchical structure, where the last level of a hierarchical is define the domain specific, right? So the meta-ontology is resides on that ground level, or
that is the problem of Aristoteles, of Aristotelian kinds of ontology. There is not a sort of very defined ontological attractor, because there is many different ways to express what is being. Okay? What Aristotle self named aei aporumeno, that is what always pose us fast to contradiction or aporia, you know. But you can also take the Scotian universe and give the clear idea what is this ontological image. But anyway, it's a more populated, more baroque ontological image as the image of Cartesianism or image of reductionism, because you can find many things, many differentiated things from the point of view of what there is, that. Okay? So let's shift. Meta-ontology is something is not only a context and can never be reduced to the field of a single ontological determination. It's the space wherein we experience forms of ontology. But if you speak about historical ontology in the sense of Jan Hacking, or discursive order with Foucault, or more concretely in history of science, you move in a meta-ontological horizon. You're placing yourself in a meta-ontological horizon. Such meta-ontological horizon is not a sort of higher order theory because of the regress to the infinite and so on and so on, but it's a sort of space wherein you give to yourself the access to something that there is not watchable or viewable in the books, there is not watchable or viewable in the illustration, but you have to construct or to extract in order to order. The fact that to conceive a theory, whatever, show to us the fundamental cognitive presupposition of an openness of a thematic space. And meta-ontology is for a while just the thematic space in which we consider, reconsider, and model the ontological images given by form of knowledge. We can also apply with some difficulties also to non-epistemic form of knowledge. Okay? Let me say, there is not my style, but let me say, every populated world, even Alice in Wonderland, get an ontology. Okay? So, the meta-ontology is a thematic space wherein we look not at the facts, nor at the theoretical structure, but what the theoretical structure gives us in order to understand the facts. Okay? Only in this space or thematical openness, in this context, we can grasp something as a theory involved in ontological commitment, something as an ontology, as ontological image of that theory. Like a model, for example. Okay? An ontological image is the model, okay, of an ontology as such. What can we do in this space? That is the practical or higher practical question. What we can do in this space, what we can describe as structure in this space, because it's not just a narrative, it's a sort of workspace, just not in order to quote Google workspaces and so on and so on. We can build, for example, yes?
So in this for meta-ontology as a context. So
What?
when we are talking about meta-ontology as a context.
Yeah, or I will more speaking about an horizon. Yeah, but.
So basically then the conception of meta-ontology of a particular system will only wouldn't it be like also arising from the ontology and the theory of individuation of the system itself? So like how will we define the thematic space if we like every ontology will have different spaces, right? For example, a Cartesian ontology will have a different space. So there is also a feeding back to the thematics of it as well, right?
You anticipate what we said. This is every ontology, as even Quine said yesterday. Said not yesterday. Said in the 60s, but anyway, that an ontology, a theory, in order to be ontological committed, must have or must be traduced in a space-time complement. What we say, a metric. Okay. If I put my, if I set my radio telescope on the sky, I cannot individuate electrons. Okay, I individuate something at this scala. Okay, or in this metric. Okay, so of course every ontology involves an idea of space that must be analyzed philosophically and involves, in order to be ontologically committed, a space-time complement. There is two different things, you know. One is most philosophical theory of history of science, is what idea of space belongs to that view, and so on and so on. For example, Kant. Okay? Kant instead, Newton, and so on and so on. But anyway, in order to be committed, They have the same presupposition of a metric. Okay? There is a very close relationship. But please do not misinterpret the special feature that we notice here with the special metrics that belongs to any ontology. Okay? One is a concrete space. It's a concrete space. It's a space that can be, which metric can be measured and individuated. Okay? This is a sort of ideal space, a conceptual space. One of the two books that illuminate me when I was in full struggle, if not burnout, to conceive that. One of this book is a book of Peter Gardenforth that talks about psychology, cognitive psychology, but also logic. This is a Scandinavian school, which books named Conceptual Spaces. And the other books is the books precisely and not by chance elaborated as PhD thesis or re-elaborated from a PhD thesis in Stanford at the beginning of the 90s. You know, Stanford was at the time the core of the informatical revolution. It is named Geometry and Meaning. So for example, every space pertaining to information theory is not a concrete space. It's space in the sense of a geometrical space in which we stock or by which we organize data. So a simple program is a many-dimensional space in a computational point of view. Okay? So that it means that it's not just a sort of dream of Fausto Fresopi, it's something happening in the world by engineering in computer, that we imagine something like ontologies ordered in spaces that are not spaces like spaces we can perceive or capture with sensors. Okay? The notion of dimension, this notion of spaces, is wider than the notion of metrics, as Riemann said. Okay? That is a methontological model that take place, okay, like other methontological model or ontological images or ontological attractors in the thematic space of methontology. Okay? For this reason, I quoted Descartes. They say, let me introduce in this journey to the imaginary spaces. Okay? What we can do in this space, what we can describe as structure in this space. We can build a meta-ontological approach, for example, to complex systems, simply by traducing the operational methods of knowledge engineering, information modeling, systemics, and cybernetics to ontological questions. We will obtain this meta-model, a neutral and formal higher-ordered presentation of ontological determinability. That is, we are still in the descriptive and not in the normative. Just this word must exist. That we do not metaphysics. You can say it's speculative, but it's not metaphysics, and then you can say to yourself, what is the difference between the speculative and the metaphysical? Okay? We can build, we can work on models. We can give us, and why we do that? That is give us a more clear idea of what is an ontological determinability. That is to say, a meta-ontological configuration as a composition and implementation of ontological images. All in this way, does a meta-ontological principle make sense? That is, what is why all I said in previous lecture and today is useful in order to understand the complex world. Why we can make a step, once more, a step forwards and say why we have to consider ontological images or ontological attractors that are three-dimensional. Nobody. This is exactly the same question as Riemann asked for metrical spaces. Why? Where is written, in which table or law is written that we have to bound ourselves to consider just that three-dimensional space as the ontological space of Aristotelian physics or Aristotelian metaphysics or Indian, I don't know what, or Cartesian metaphysics or quantum mechanics was just difficult because we have two correlated spaces that are intertwined and so on and so on. The problem is, and if the particular objectuality of complex system could be modelable by an n-dimensional meta-ontological space. We talk about plurality of level of organization, we talk about emergence, we talk about multidimensionality. Why we cannot translate such many fine words in concrete model? We watch or that we experience that it's possible for the attractor. Classical mechanics give a kind of a family of attractor, lines and points, okay? But non-classical dynamics give other shapes of attractor, okay? Toroids, butterflies, and so on and so on. And it is the same thing, the same case for meta-ontological modeling. We will have, for complex systems, ontological images or implementation of many ontological images or ontological attractors that are not so plain as the simple determination of that thing, okay? For example, something like that, okay? We will another kind of ontological images. Why? Because there are many ontologies and many parameters of metrics of individuation that we find in a complex system. For this reason, when we have to do to the many, our simplifying instinct say today, okay, then does not exist. That is just a sort of reflex of protecting yourself and bringing yourself to stability, okay? Okay, we can agree with it. Every theory has an ontology, every theory has an ontology. This ontology is simple and individuable in one metric. That is simple because we are just one regional ontology and one semantics. Then what entails more than that does not exist. For example, dynamics of mass population does not entail only biological stuff, that we have not to mess how many birds we have, okay? But just other kinds of instantiated realities that pertain to the phenomenon we have to study, okay? Mass migration is the same, bird flocks are the same, and so on and so on. The many modular, as we said yesterday, the many hierarchical, the holonomic and non-holonomic constraints. For example, a non-holonomic constraints, this is something in a complex systems constraining the system not for the whole, but for just a part of the system, usually pertain an ontology or an ontological image, but not all ontological images. Okay? We can enhance a principle of meta-ontological framing. We can conceive a manifold of frames as mereological components of a model of something whose parts are the single ontological images of epistemic structure. This mereo-topological composition provides the so-called meta-ontological connex, or connex. Let me explain. We are at the point where you have to use your imagination, okay? And recover the imagination with what we said before. Okay? We said that a simple ontology is a modelable with a tree space. Okay, and from this three-dimensional space becomes arise a sort of ontological model and ontological attractor. Okay, if we think many hierarchical organization of the heterogeneity of components of a complex system like an ecosystem, we can have the ontological attractor 1, then we have ontological attractor 2, the same, just nice thing, with PA and ROA different, because we are talking about parts of the same system interacting and functioning in a different way. Then we have the ontological attractor 1 results from the Cartesian articulation of formal ontology. That is always the same because we are in a path-string world. Plus PA1 plus, no, sorry. Formal ontology plus RO1 plus PA1. Okay? That is the result. The result. What gives us this funny thing. Okay? For this, we have the same, the ontological attractor 2, resulting from 3 classes of parameters. The formal ontology predicates, plus another semantic of another regional ontology, plus other metrics or forms of individuation. And we have something located that, for example, in a circle. Let's take it fantastically. And so on and so on. Not in infinite, because a complex system cannot entail infinite kinds of new things, okay? So we can compose, okay, or we can articulate that forms of ontological attractors, okay? That is by adding to the first tridimensional space the other spaces, 2 by 2. We add another PA2, and we add necessarily an RO2. Okay? Then we have a space in 5 dimensions. I said already by Descartes, and then by our explication of attractors, we can have many dimensional space of modeling something. Okay? So, in our modeling practice is not something occasional, something demanded from the thing. If I will model, for example, simply and very roughly, an ecosystem by the 2 main families of ontologies that are inside, this is biotical and abiotical element, we have at least 2 regional ontology, the regional ontology of biotics and the regional ontology of abiotics, okay, of the abiotic. Okay? So we have, with plus formal ontology, a space in 5 dimensions, and our ontological image resulting from the superposition of the 2 ontological images over the dual attractor changes. And we can mess it because we have the same old grammar to model things, not things, to model structures. And that is, for example, the ontological connex of not just the ontological image of something like an ecosystem Rowley token, because then we can multiply the ontological regional ontology of an ecosystem for biotics for 7, 8. I will not sketch the 7, 8 dimension, okay? And the 7, 8 for example, abiotical elements. So if we rightly or exactly model an ecosystem and become what the ecosystemic is talking about, I will become a meta-ontological connex of 15 dimension. Not by chance, it's the same dimension that we mentioned in that example, that the metaphor that a little funny ball rules on the landscapes given, etc., etc. Not by chance. Okay? So, this is not something, this is, we will fantasy, is I imagine a space, an adapted space, wherein that makes sense. Okay? That's prejudge nothing about the existence of the ecosystem, of course. Okay? It's just making you clear what you're talking about. In complex system, you're talking about not single ontologies. The aboutness is not given by single ontologies. It's given by a meta-ontological connex. Okay? If you take it disciplinarily, okay, let's just prove it. Then we will take in account, after the long pause that you need in order to recover, we'll take in account more concretely. What we said yesterday about the nihilism, okay? Why people deny the existence of the aboutness of complexity sciences? What is about this? They deny there is a corresponding ontology of complexity sciences, while we are here sort of area that includes very concrete scientific area of science with its own domain. So what the complexity science is talking about is something heterogeneous, entailing parts of methods of procedure of other sciences having their own domain, that is, grasping on definite ontologies. Okay? But the results of that thing is something other, that is, the aboutness is not empty, is something resulting from a connex of different ontologies. And what we say about the meta-ontological connex is that it's the result of the fusion between all ontological images used by other sciences, plus one, the formal ontology, that must remain invariate because instead we don't know what we are speaking about concretely. Okay? So in a way, you can take it speculative or idealistic. In a way, we give to us the aboutness of the ultimate, not because we determined what is a complex system is ontologically, the ultimate or the ground aboutness of a complex view on something. Okay? We don't create the world, we don't create complexity, we don't project something complex on a non-complex world. We create the space in which we build models in order to understand what is about. Okay? So we give name, in the not sort of a semantical name, a sort of name and shape to something we are talking about since the beginning or the end of the 18th century, and we bring it to a sort of clarity. For this reason, it's not metaphysics, because it's impossible. So, if tomorrow I will talk you about the metaphysics of complexity, you say the man is a bit mental sick or the mental ill because he talks us about relativity, manifolds, and so on and so on. He cannot come here to sell a metaphysics of complexity or holistic things like the world is complex, the reality per se is complex, not because the reality per se is simple, but because we exceed these naive holistic claims, or we abandon these naive holistic claims, metaphysically oriented, if not theologically, and we go to the possibility, concretely work possibility, to talk or to know what it's about. Okay? And what it's about is a meta-ontological context, not just a funny words or very good sounding words, but the result of composition of ontological images. Okay? There is the ontological attractor emerging from the composition of many ontological attractors. Is the composition of many ontological images. What you cannot represent, for example, just go back to our yesterday discourse about speech, about perspective, you cannot represent to you in more than two. For example, if you say to you that a complex system or a complex phenomenon must be viewed from, like an ecosystem, from 15 or the 14 different perspectives, you cannot imagine it, because in the best case, your perspective, you can represent your perspective as bifocal, 2 points of perspective. So that exceeds your capacity of representation. Huh? So multi-perspectivism or multi-perspectival focusing can introduce to the thing, but it cannot represent the ultimate explanation of the thing. We have to, like perspective should be implemented with this clear geometry, we must implement the multi-perspectivism or multifocal perspectivism, when the foci are not just 1 or 2, but 17 and so on, with another form of seeing that is not sensible. Okay? So let's resume. We can talk, no, resume the first part, then come the second. Let's sum up. we don't talk metaphysically. We just open a space in which we can describe and extract ontological images from theory or more in a more vague way from approach to the phenomenal world, okay? And then we become, by this representation, by this way of thinking, we become ontological images. For complex phenomena, there is no one ontological images because there is no unique ontology. There is no one theory that approach the thing. So let's say that that can be the position from which you look to other part. So many perspectives, but many perspectives are just an image, okay? So the meta-ontological connex is the result of our modeling composition of the manifold ontological images converging in the fixation or in the aboutness of single approach to complex systems. Okay? A theory has an ontology, okay? There is no necessarily a metaphysics. A theory has an ontology. When it's matter of many theory converging towards something, this something cannot be ontologically clear because does not belong to this on that ontology. There is no clear ontological image, one-to-one, in order to say, okay? Then we have to create or to elaborate a form of view in order to think what is about. And the meta-ontological connex is the aboutness of our ontological approach to complexity. Okay, yeah?
So are we assuming that meta-ontology is complete? Whereas we argued in the last class that...
No, I don't see that meta-ontology is complete.
So when we argued in the last class that complexity is not an ontological property.
Yeah.
Right. And there is a residue of phenomenality always, which cannot be exhausted by an ontological description.
Perfect.
Yes. So we are bringing the idea of meta-ontological connex to understand first the ontological heterogeneity and the residue of phenomenality.
From one ontology.
From one ontology?
No, in the sense that is, if one ontology admit always in complexity one residual,
Yes.
okay, the meta-ontology encompasses the residualities to each single ontology and made from it an ontological complex, but there is no completeness.
There is no...
The completeness in the sense.
So what was historically assigned to ontology, that ontology is an exhaustive description of the
Yes.
world. So meta-ontology is not like that. That is what you are arguing. So there is an opening.
It's an open space.
An open space in order to give to ourselves aboutness, forms of aboutness. And it's a very, very good question because when it's matter of emergence, okay, in order to avoid the metaphysical claims, they anticipate on what we will say after. When we talk about emergence, in order to avoid the metaphysical claims of strong emergence and strong reduction, okay, we can take the mild forms, weak emergence, or weak reduction as principle in order to understand. And then there must be an open space, because if I have, for example, an emergence, okay, a form of emergence, epistemically, I'm not metaphysically committed. I can say, as many epistemologists or many scientists say, I don't say about the novelty of the word, but this is we will approach in the second part of the lecture. I say something emerged that is not reducible to others. Okay, we said already that it's very a bit wrong to think it is a layer cake, but anyway, it's not reducible to a very clear ontology lying in the system or operating in the system before. Okay? Then our meta-ontological connex can amplify itself by adding two other dimensions, and we have the aboutness without having the need to claim there is an absolute novelty of the world. You know, for this reason, we have to take seriously, of one side, the faculty of our mind to give us access to new form of aboutness, and from the second point of view, from the other sides, more philosophically, that a very high encompassing form of thinking must not necessarily be metaphysical. Okay? Maybe we end with this claim and we come back. I will say, once back, I will give the second part of my lecture plus debate. Okay? Okay? Thank you. So let's imagine you have 1 hour break. Let's imagine this new many-dimensional meta-ontological spaces and walks on the campus without being obsessed by formalism. Okay? Thank you. Yeah, just a moment. I take my phone. So once conceived this idea of meta-topological composition, what is meta-topological composition? That is, that the meta-ontological connex is made from parts and spaces that belongs one to another in relation to the complex, but singularly taken from other theories and from other ontological places. It means that the parts, mere, okay, are spaces that are connected. All that must maintain an epistemological frame for operating, working on the understanding of complexity of manifestation, obviously from the point of view of, from ultimate point of view of its aboutness, but not complexity of manifestation as such. We cannot, for example, claim that complex world is an ontological connex, okay? Just that model of complex system show to us a meta-ontological connex, and so on and so on. That is, we take a step back from holistic metaphysics of complexity of the world and complexity of manifestation. But let's explain it more concretely and manually. There's just an appetizing. You are not in need to understand what will be said concretely, but just in order to approach what follows, that is the problem or a general mapping about emergence, reduction, and a philosophical stance about emergence and reduction. So, if we have, for example, a meta-ontological model that is a meta-ontological connex, okay? One. It's composed at least, because it must be a connex, of two meta-ontological model, that is meta-ontological model of the ontology one, a meta-ontological model of ontology two, okay? According to what we said yesterday, that's the, or even today, that defines a topological space 1 and a topological space 2. And even remember what we said about what we watched about the in the tutorial about topology of graph theory. Okay? So, and according to Quine, every ontological model must have, in order to become an ontology, concrete ontology, a matrix, metric 1, for example, a metric 2. If you sum O1 plus O2, we have a meta-ontological connex, that's for sure. That entails two topological spaces and entails two metrics. It's plain, okay? That is, in order to individuate something in a very, very simple meta-ontological connex, or in an attractor, there is more complex as a simple attractor, already we are in need to sum or to bring two topological space one to another and two metrics one to another in order to become just a simple orientation where we had to look in order to capture the data following the model verification, okay? And it's a very, very different stuff. And we have to find a grammar according to that we can handle with this. And the grammar is the grammar of morphism and transformation. In category theory, what I will spare us. What is such strange thing? Okay, we notice from the tutorial, okay, that graph theory entails topology, and a graph can entail many different topologies. I will not go into detail, but when we model by graph theory, and when you have to do or to handle with a graph, this graph can model complex system because the elements are not homogeneous. If you have a graph modeling non-homogeneous things, you have what we call a multi-layered graph, okay? Just by exemplificating, this simple graph can have, the nodes of this simple graph can have many flavors, okay? One is can be white, one can be black, one is can be striped, and so on and so on. It means that when you model a complex systems, even without question about aboutness, even without question about topology and so on and so on, no, it's about the ground question about topology, you have a sort of intertwining of topological spaces. So what we need here is not something occasional coming from a sort of pleasure for formalization. Something coming from an inner need to handle with complexity as complex system as graphs, that entails topological space, that entails, in order to be captured in the horizon of manifestation, metrics, okay? And then we must have sort of general grammar at least to copy these two things, okay? Or if you take the graph, we must have, for this reason, we must have graphs or parts of a graph. We must have a topology, and we must have a metric, okay? So we can handle this because, for example, when emerged something, the graph 1 becomes the graph G, the graph 1 becomes the graph C2. The topology of the graph becomes the topology 2, and the matrix will be implemented in another forms of matrix, of metric, okay? So we have sort of strange object, okay? There is a sort of dynamics of transformation. So just in order to say that what we say here is not something that is just a speculative purpose, okay? Okay, I like handle with geometry and topology and mathematics category theory, I apply it. It's intrinsic to the working out with graph, that is a working out with, is a dealing with complex phenomena. So if I have this nice graph on my screen, that graph are directed by sort of computing using topologies, and these things must be metric because instead we cannot identify what happens and where happens, okay? So if I transform G1 into G2, the topology 1 transforms in topology 2, and the M1 transforms in M2. For example, if something emerges in a complex network, okay, another layer of the network, this is another flavor of the nodes and the relation emerge, necessarily I have another object. That entails as I must have another topology, and then I have another matrix that comes from the implementation of that elements. Okay, that is not too complicated. Just handle concretely with it is complicated. Okay, but plainly explained is just an handling with. So let's take a very, very route comparison. If Aristotle explained to us in the Organon how to handle with syllogism, okay? Socrates, every man is mortal, Socrates is a man, then Socrates is mortal, and then I say that is Socrates, or the something like Socrates, then is in a human, and so on and so on. It's not quite different from that thing, but that things reach another level of expansion. If I learn from Aristotle to handle with syllogisms, okay, to transform one syllogism in another, and so on and so on. If I learn with Descartes or Leibniz also to do a combinatoric of syllogism, okay, ars combinatoria, and or to calculate differential calculus, okay? And if I consider that is not quite different, but our spectrum of phenomenality has so radically changed that we need necessarily to adopt this thing in order to fail the description, okay? So we can also not only name, like yesterday, a meta-ontological connex, and we have a grammar in order to handle with ontological connexes. So we can, in a way, make us clear what happens when something emerges or when something as emergent will be reduced to the previous structure. For example, if I have this simple graph, I say that the nodes emerging, okay, are completely of the same kind of the black nodes, okay? So just manually I color it. Then of course I can say that that transformation in G1 top 1 M1 and G2 top 2 M2 can be just an enlargement or a sort of specification of that kind of stuff without complicating my life with more dimensional topologies, with more complicated matrix or more complicated graph. But can be also the reverse, okay? I cannot flavor these points. These points subsist per se as new kinds of relation, as new kinds of nodes, and then I need necessarily to handle with a more articulated model. And my meta-ontological connex must be more articulated, and I have a sort of grasp on the thing that is more articulated, is not too reducible to the previous one. Okay? Accentuating the working out and defining such, this is not a definition, it's sort of show or sort of showing up. By defining such things, such grammar, and we are very far from perspective, you can notice, isn't it? And accentuating the working out, it shows that this descriptive, constructive meta-ontology is concrete related to the needs to know something about, okay? So when we speak about many dimensionality of the complex world, of course, the expression can be appealing, but without working out structure that are working out since historically, theoretically, since 1 week, okay, we don't really understand what it is. It's kind of metaphor like another. If you present you just a metaphor, the behavior an ecosystem can be considered as a ball rolling down a landscape made by an n-dimensional topological space. Okay, you say, oh, okay, funny image. I like it, but in knowledge is not matter to like or not. It's the matter to know or not. Or in which mass critical thinking we can know, and which measure we can know, and which measure we can't. Okay? So such maximal abstraction is due to the fact that one is matter of talking about multidimensionality of our life. For example, I bring you just an example I'm working out for phenomenology. Even Husserl, in the late manuscripts, okay, named, containing in the 39th book of Husserliana, of collected works, on the life world, name such a multidimensionality of our life world, okay? But he has no grammar for it, okay? And many phenomenologists take it just as an expression, a bit poetical expression, and don't work the thing, because in order to work the thing, do you have to work out in just another context other stuff, and then to bring both together. So if, for example, it is not really applicable, if we can make a full taxonomy of our ontological region, okay, and bring ontological region, the structure of our experience, to that graph structure, then we have a bit clearer idea what is the multidimensionality of our life world. If we talk about the funny ball rolling down, beyond the metaphor, we have two choices. The first is take the metaphor as the real and then made a sort of discourse without conceptual grasping. The other is to work out what it means. So, what is this rolling down? Okay, is a sort of behavior taken by the about what we talk, and eventually given new phenomena like bifurcation and so on. They're not able to be grasped from our first structures, and not contained in our meta-ontological connex. So our image, meta-ontological image of the thing is wrong because does not take in account something that emerged after. The question is, how such descriptive model constructive meta-ontology applied to the problem of structural understanding of our complex system is opposed to reductionism and or emergentism on one side, or can be articulated to reductionism and or emergentism. Okay? Then let's explain what are, how can be considered reductionism and emergentism, and we also mentioned the two possibilities: they take the name strongly and they take the name weakly. Weakly is not a sort of weakness of our philosophical approach. It's just a sort of cautelary, metaphysical uncommitment. Okay? You can find now a sort of survey of literature on the topic. Okay? So the first is maybe you know Hilary Putnam. Okay? The first is the very, very strong formulation of reductionism and unity of science. And from the point of view of history of philosophy, and history of metaphysics, history of epistemology, the formulation of the program of unity of science go hand in hand with reductionism. That is consists in brief, it's very, very comic, because if you read the small paper, very, very funny paper, very, very elegant paper. You have the idea that the world works as matrioskas, Rus matrioskas, okay? We are atoms, then we are molecules, then we have tissues, unicellular bacteria, then we have tissues, then we have organized living beings, and so on. This is like a matryoshka, okay? What is the unity of science? Is to reduce the upper layer to the lower, the lower one to the lower two, to the ground level of basic physical system, and you can explain the world, and you can realize the unity of science. Not by chance, the program made by epistemologists in Stanford or the Stanford School, or even by a very, very good epistemologist and philosopher in USA named Nancy Cartwright, the Draplet World, claim the disunity of science. Or, in the middle, we can claim a modular unity of science that is not this pyramid, in order to say. So it's very, very interesting paper. Then the two strong reductionistic, or the reductionistic approach, or the paper that give rise to the debate between reductionism, or many forms of reductionism and many forms of emergentism, making sense of emergence, Kim, 1999, and 27, most elaborated, physicalism or something near enough, okay? But by a simple reasoning, this is very clear, and it's very challenging for the science of ontology of complexity. If my brain is made up from neurons, okay, consciousness is not something emergent, it's just the result of neuronal interaction. If you generalize it, we can do everything, every emergence reasonment in this sense, every emergent things, let's reduce to this idea of united science as a working hypothesis by made reductionist claim, having to reduce and to try to explain the upper level to the lower level, and then the unity is given by chains of reduction, okay? It's a very Cartesian one, if you will, okay? And then you have the answer, but no, it's not the first answer, but the very detailed answer, because Humphreys published many papers in the 90s. Emergence, a philosophical account. This is a counter-count of this. And then we have that. This is very, for me, is very, very problematic. You can easily understand the metaphysics of emergence, of the re-emergence of emergence, in sense of how emergence emerge as problem from a sort of reductionist landscape, and then we have more and more related papers that brings you to complexity, and one important is here, Hooker 2011b, conceptualizing reduction, emergence, and self-organization in complex dynamical system. Why? Because you have on the drive. You have, it is the one that you can find on the drive without loading the drive with matter that you cannot assimilate, because if I laid every paper, you cannot assimilate the rest. So please start with this, and then maybe if you are interested in contemporary ontology, you can switch on the other papers that will define a constellation of discourses. So there are many, according to this debate, reemergence of emergence, reductionist claims, and so on and so on. You have many forms of reductionism and many forms of emergentism. They are not a sort of contraposition between one thesis and one thesis. If you will, you can choose, but the scientist is not interested in it. Okay, but for philosophy is the new horizon of ontological debate. You can define a spectrum of forms of reductionism and a spectrum of forms of emergentism. But what distinguishes the debate as such, and we come to first philosophy and ontology. The debate as such is that there are many forms, but one fundamental question. The question is there a novelty in the world? Okay? What is novelty? An Unterklammern, okay? It's something that we're not something that we are not noticed before. If I discover a new quasar, it's not a novelty in the world, okay? It's still there. I have law for describe it, and so on and so on. Novelty under Kramer is novelty in ontological meaning. That is, if the world is once for all determined basically. Such question assume the question we have identified according to Varzi to the question of metaphysics. What is there? Okay? We can determine in what the world consists. But the question is enforced if we answer the question what is there once for all by what? By metaphysics. Because an ontology, by its relativity, cannot today, nowadays, answer the world. So our metaphysics must answer the question, okay? Without asking metaphilosophically, metaphysics, if the question is answerable and under which condition, the answer is valid or true once for all. So, now the importance, philosophical importance, centrality to know in philosophy, question the questions, okay? The question taken in this context, the context of debate between reductionism and emergentism about complex world and complex system. Is there a novelty in the world? Is the question, if we answer, is linked to the question, if I answer the question, what is there, metaphysical question, the answer is valid or true once for all, because if we state that something is there, or many things are there, okay? And our metaphysics claims that only that things can be there, like the metaphysics of possible world. Logically speaking, this answer must be valid once for all, that there is no novelty in the world. Is that we can admit the possibility of a novelty in the world. That's every kind of metaphysics determining what is there is just partial, is just pro tempore. In other words, do we have tools to describe, to determine the ultimate inventory of the world? What is the central chapter of analytical metaphysics today? Okay? You can find it curious, but it's not. The ontology and metaphysics today in analytical debate concern the possibility for human mind to describe, to redact an inventory of the world. I will not be so critical because I'm so critical about that. And if you will, it's correspond to the working hypothesis and claim to be the end of a working hypothesis because the unities of science must necessarily, in the old-fashioned way of thinking, ends with metaphysics that can describe the novelty of the world. In the Aristotelian world, there is no ontological novelty. In the mechanical world of Newton and Descartes, there is no ontological novelty. Okay? So, people can think, why must be a novelty, or must we admit a novelty that is the impossibility of an ontological metaphysics while encountering complex systems? You know, there is not too technical. There is sort of claims between philosophical way of thinking outside metaphysics or independently from metaphysics, and thinking still linked to metaphysics, as if metaphysics were or could be the finalization of our project of unity of science, even in an hypothetical way. Okay? We will be able anyway in the future by metaphysical discourses to determine what is the ultimate inventory of the world. So, on emergentism and on reductionism, can we ask the following question, and this is very, very related to another approach. This is a critical transcendental approach, okay? That is, that we have no possibility to determine the whole once for all, and the whole of the world will remain a sort, in the best case, a sort of asymptotic point, and or in the more acceptable case, sort of horizon of our thinking. Okay? Not something as a list of everything existing in the world, like by the project of analytical metaphysics. So, are both legitimated, emergentism and reductionism? If yes, in which way? As ontological thesis or as strategies? There is two different ways, because we are legitimated at all is antinomic. Either I admit there is a novelty in the world, so I take in account the metaphysical ontology of emergence, strong emergence. By necessity, there is an emergence in the world. And then I deny reductionism, strong reductionism. Or I admit, as mentioned before, that emergentism and reductionism are strategies in order to better understand what happens with complexity in particular. Proceed to color the nodes that was stripped before black, what I gain and what I lost. If it's impossible to reduce without a very, very sensible loss of information, okay? What happened? Emergence, what is emergence? Is a strong emergence. I'm able to claim that there is novelty in the world, or I'm able just to say that by admitting that such complex systems show this novelty, I cannot to think it by reducing to something other. That is the thing. And if you will, is a Kantian strategy. So if you lead the transcendental dialectics, and in particular the antinomies, let's take the two absolute or the four antinomies, the two absolute for each antinomies as a sort of strong emergentist and realist, emergentist and reductionist, and you say that our knowledge of the world moves into the spectrum given by absolute metaphysical emergentism and absolute metaphysical reductionism. So we can also take emergentism and reductionism not as thesis taken strongly metaphysically, but as point of orientation of our description. And if you can notice by Kant, by denying the possibility to grasp the unconditioned, the think of Kant is not so weak as it can appear. It's a very stable disposition somewhere some way different and more granular what is happening in a complex world, complex society, complex market, ecosystem, and so on and so on. If I take the first, so I reduce everything to the first, I lost information on complexity. I can no longer recognize the thing. And it's very, very useful, if you will, because for societal and educational concerns, this is what we will explain tomorrow, is central, okay? If you take the human brain as a computing machine, as you take the human brain as a complex organism interacting with the environment, is two other kind of consideration that deal or define from a societal point of view two other kinds of politics and two other kinds of entire different strategies and also type of education. So if you say metaphysically, as in the superstition of our capitalist information society, that we are computing machine, our brain is a computing machine, what follows are very, very strong decisions from many points of view. We will say yesterday, tomorrow and after tomorrow. So to sketch the general features from ontological point of view of emergence and reductionism in two different philosophical ways. Okay, one way is metaphysical, one way is critical transcendental, is just two kinds of solve and even recognize problem in our society and in our education. Then we can just ask the question, it is just a mapping. So, is a mapping, but is a mapping in a very, very other feature as a sort of sketch of cartographies. We can map the shifts of our knowledge, for example, by going by G to top to M, and interpret it from the point of view of model theory, model validation, and model verification, and so on and so on. And then going to the transformation of each element in order to say what of both corresponding each to one meta-ontological connex can give us access to a more granular, precise, and critical discussion about complex phenomena. So just summing up, many hierarchies, emergence of phenomena, patterns emergence, many dimensional, all that graph theory, all that was in the tutorial. If you take stances, if you remember what was your stand or the rate of understanding of that tutorial, I hope, at that time, and then what is the understanding of your tutorial at that time, you have at least, in my view, one increase or one result, that you know what you are talking about, without just taking examples. Because examples without a guide to interpret the example are still unclear. Let's take the tutorial once more. Where is internet? Oh, okay, sorry. Okay. What is a complex system? Let's, okay.
In this module, we will be trying to define what
And maybe I have to ask the PowerPoint. Simply close the PowerPoint. Okay, that's because. Okay, just reconsider the thing. Okay, from the point
exactly
of
a
view
complex
of-
system is. Before we start, we should note that there is no formal definition for what a complex system is, and thus there remains many different perspectives and opinions on the subject. What we present here is just a working definition. Firstly, a complex system is a special class of system. A system is simply a set of parts called elements, and a set of connections between these parts called relations.
The moments, we know that the puzzling heterogeneity of the systems and this puzzling form of relation now have a sort of relation to the aboutness. Okay? It's not because we have triangles, squares, pentagons, and circles we cannot understand, like a sort of salad fruit. We have a tool in order to that. And even if this corresponds to many ontologies, we can put that together in oriented to an aboutness in a meta-ontological point of view.
These parts can be ordered or unordered. An unordered system is simply a set of things. Because there
Our case, because we watch that the aboutness of complex system is not the aboutness of the thing contained in the box. I cannot take one element from ontology 1, one element from ontology 2, one element from ontology 3 and say this is a complex system and ask me what it's about. It's about of a sum, an ordered sum of object.
structure or order, we can describe a set simply by listing all of its elements and their properties. So a pile of stones on the ground is an example of an unordered set. As there is no pattern or order to the system, we can only describe it by describing the properties of each element in isolation and then
means here, if you will, for our purpose, reduction. Okay? Elements in isolation, I break the complexity of the system. I take the thing as a sort of, in best way, as a mechanical system, not a complex one, and then analyzes the parts and the function of the parts, like in a machine.
with the whole set being nothing more than the sum of its individual parts. If, in contrast, through the relations, these parts are ordered in a specific way, then they can function together as an entirety, and out of these parts working together, we get the emergence of a global pattern of organization that is capable of functioning as a coherent whole. For example,
And that's coherent whole, functioning as a coherent whole, needs a grammar that is different, because even if you had the coherent whole, and the coherent whole implements itself by emergence, I have to follow step by step, that by emergence, what the coherent whole become. And for this reason, we have to go local. There is not the structure of the word, okay? There is not the structure of the word. It's the structure of aboutness we modeled considering the dynamics of complex systems.
if all the parts in our car are arranged in a specific way, then we will have the global functionality of a vehicle of transportation, or out of the specific arrangement of billions of cells and the different specialized organs that make up our body, we get the emergence of a global system that enables us to operate as an entire organism. So that is the basic model of a system. It consists of elements and relations. When those elements work together, we get the emergence of a new level of organization.
Of the new level of organization is the switch between this level or ontology 1 or meta-ontological complex 1 and meta-ontological complex 2. Okay? Because already the first level of a complex system is a meta-ontological connex, okay? And then they transform its topology in another topology. We will see by reconsidering the second tutorial, and transform also its matrix in another matrix. So we can follow what is a self-organizing system.
Complexity to this. Probably the only property that will be in all definitions of a complex system is that they consist of many parts. Many parts that are distributed out without centralized control. Organization is formed out of the local interactions between the parts through a process of self-organization that gives rise to the emergence of new levels of organization. With the phenomenon of emergence that we were previously discussing, a whole new level to the system has developed, which then starts to interact with other systems in its environment. The result being that new patterns of organization develop, and once again we get.
Because, for example, this elemental graph structure has been developed in a multi-layer networks. Okay, we cannot think that multi-level, but also modular network. But anyway, something comes up, and we must be able not only to model it, but to think its aboutness. Okay, and this aboutness is not a thing, is not an individual, located in a well-defined ontology for which we have X, Y, and Z.
Emergence of another level of organization, and so on. People form part of social groups that form part of broader society, which in turn forms part of humanity. The point to take away here is that these systems have a hierarchical structure. This is a pervasive phenomenon in our world. Elements are nested inside of subsystems, which in turn form part of larger systems, and so on. All complex systems have this multidimensional property to them. They are composed of many elements on many different scales, with all of these levels.
So now you can even have a clear idea that the multidimensionality is not like a physical multidimensionality. We talk in an ideal space, in a conceptual space, but this conceptual space is not fantasy, it's just worked out by imagination till the maximum level of meta-ontology, because we need what is to know or to make us clear what is about. Because multi-dimension is not seenable in nature as the 15th dimension of the ecosystem, like a ball rolling.
Affecting each other. A business is part of a local economy, which is part of a national economy, which in turn is part of a global economy. Each is interconnected and interdependent with the others. We cannot fully isolate one component or reduce the whole thing to one level, and this is a primary source of complexity.
Lost information about complexity, then we lost the complexity itself. So, if I reduce my brain to a computing machine, I lost its complexity. It's just a complication between neurons. My idea, my expectation that then comes to a multi-ethnical society and so on are lost in my critical consideration. And my policy follows up, just in order to anticipate tomorrow. As I think, as living system as dictated by the elemental grammar of DNA, is exactly the same. Many billions of dollars have been spent in order to fulfill those programs. It's not just a case of theoretical philosophy, Kant, transcendental philosophy, okay? Let's anticipate to tomorrow.
Is our first property to a complex system. Many different parts that are distributed out with local interactions and self-organization, giving rise to new emergent levels on different scales. Next, interdependence and nonlinearity. The parts to a complex system are highly interdependent, and this interdependence creates nonlinearity. Almost all well-formulated definitions for complex systems involve the term nonlinearity. It is a continuously recurring and pervasive theme.
Also find it in the topology and the metric. That is not by articulating the topology of one topological space that you can become the second topological space. It's just another kind, okay? And if it's emerged, and we cannot explain by reductionism, there is simply just another thing. And the complex system recognizes itself as just such another thing, not in terms of things, material things, in terms, of course, of the aboutness as meta-ontological connects.
Nonlinearity arises from the fact that when we put two or more things together, the result may not necessarily be a simple addition of each element's properties in isolation. In contrary, we may get a combined effect that is greater or less than the simple sum of each part because of their interdependent nature. Examples of this might be two sound waves that are perfectly out of sync, canceling each other out through noise interference, or the division of labor as can be seen in many human and insect communities, resulting in synergies, which means the output will be far greater than what individuals could accomplish in isolation. Due to what are called feedback loops, nonlinear systems may grow or decay at an exponential rate. These periods of rapid change are defined as phase transitions. Thus, able to shift or flip into whole new regimes within very brief periods of time. Some small change in input value to the system can, through feedback loops, trigger a large systemic effect. This is called sensitivity to initial conditions, and it is the central idea within chaos theory. Examples of this butterfly effect can be seen in financial crises and the collapse of ecosystems such as coral reefs. Next, connectivity. Many definitions for complex systems involve dense or high levels of interconnectivity between components. As we turn up the degree of connectivity, it becomes the nature and structure of these connections that define the system as opposed to the properties of its components. How are things connected, and what is connected to what, become the main questions. At some critical level of connectivity, the system stops being a set of parts and becomes a network of connections, and it is now all about how things flow in this network.
In this network, you can find, even from the point of view of ontology and philosophy, that the non-global or local constraints that affect that nodes, okay, entails another cluster. That is, that nodes seems to be a node, but in the fact is a cluster. There's many nodes held together with some local constraints. Then we have two different things. We have a cluster into a cluster, or we have a multi-layered network for which one of these elements can reveal itself a cluster. From the classic point of view of ontology, you cannot even decipher what it is. Or you make a mystical approach to graphs, then you have a mystical approach to topological space, then you put together, and at the end of the day, you have a sort of macro vision of the world, but it's not so useful. It's spend time. It's better to walk, okay, and to make poetry. But, you know, there is what we need. Now we have, if you will, multidimensionality here. We have the graphs here. We have the experimental feature here, and in my view, beyond ask critical question about rationality, about mankind, about societal and educational commitment, like we will do in the next 2 days. The first philosophy must search for a general grammar in order to understand what it's about. of our life, what is about of our nature, of the politics, and so on.
So the true geometry of complex systems and this connectivity reshapes our traditional three-dimensional Euclidean conception of space. In complex systems like the global air transportation system, or the financial system, or the internet, space is redefined in terms of topology created by connectivity. What matters is your position in the network structure and your degree of connectivity.
Even by that. A graph implies a topology. The transformation of the graph by what? By emergence of something gives us the transformation of. Gives us the aboutness, still not, because we have to accomplish two other steps and connect that last steps to our meta-ontological modeling. So this is the Spielraum, the space of play of fundamental questioning of first philosophy, okay?
Connectivity again leads us into the world of complexity as the number of relations between elements can grow in an exponential fashion. If we take just a handful of elements, they can become connected in possibly thousands or even millions of different ways. Lastly, autonomy and adaptation. Whether we are talking about a flock of birds, the internet, or our global economy, there is no top-down centralized mechanism for coordinating the whole system. Within complex systems, elements have a degree of autonomy, often through their capacity to adapt to their local environment according to their own set of instructions. Without centralized coordination and with a degree of autonomy, elements can synchronize their states locally or cooperate, resulting in the emergence of patterns of organization from the bottom up. With autonomy and adaptation also comes the capacity for a variety of different responses for any given phenomenon, meaning complex systems are often heterogeneous, with high levels of diversity. Ecosystems and multicultural societies are good examples of this. Without centralized coordination, complex systems develop on the macro scale through a process of evolution. Elements within complex adaptive systems are subject to the evolutionary force of selection, where those that are best suited to that environment are selected and replicated, while others are not. Products are subjected to selection within a market environment. In democracies, politicians are subject to selection by voters, and creatures and ecosystems are subjected to natural selection through competition. In such a way, the whole macro-scale system manages to adapt to its environment without centralized coordination and develop to exhibit higher levels of both differentiation and integration. The greater the autonomy and capacity for adaptation that elements have, the more complex the system we are dealing with. In summary, we have been trying to lay down a basic working definition for a complex system while remembering that there is no formal consensus on the subject. We firstly talked about how a complex system is a special class of system. We defined a system as a set of elements and the relations between them. We saw how when these parts are arranged in a specific order for them to function as an entirety, we get what is called the process of emergence, whereby a new level of organization emerges. We then began to add complexity to our model of a system by defining it as a product of 4 primary parameters. Firstly, talking about the number of elements and different levels to the hierarchy within our system. We then discussed nonlinearity as another dimension to complexity, where non-additive interactions and feedback loops over time can give us exponential relations between the input and output to a system and lead to phase transitions. We also talked about connectivity as another driver of complexity, as heightened connectivity within complex systems means they often appear to us as networks. Lastly, we discussed how autonomy and adaptation enable self-organization and the process of evolution that shapes complex systems on the macro scale.
Just in order to conclude this long ontological journey, At the time we watched firstly this video, we had scattered idea. So we have working definition, we had summary of element or properties that mirror themselves on the second tutorial about complexity science, if you will, strictly related for one thing named here. There is a sort of branch of science named in the second tutorial, okay? And we have a sort of general idea by examples, okay? This is the fact. We can vaguely, why? Now we can, I presume, and I hope, to know what it's about. That is, and what talking about complex phenomena like multicultural society market looks like, and at which level, what level we have to reach in order not just to have a heterogeneous example with notes on complexity, but something linked together in an aboutness that of course occurs not in the space of plate discourse in every context. We have to reach the highest, if you will, theoreticity demanded to thinking in order then to come back to the example and reconsider the example from the point of view of policies and so on, with a more peculiar view, because we know not only what it's about, and there is not an about concerning something, it's about concerning a very, very specific something occurring in a specific way that we constructed and so on, and work it out and so on and so on. What is to speaking about complexity in a public dimension or complex phenomena, and how the differential between the knowledge we need and the commitment, even personal commitment, we need in order to speak about complex system is far away from the elementary speeches that we lead about phenomena interest us all every day. Okay? Just in order to switch to the practical implication of the thing. Because everyone say, but that is complex, in order to put aside society's integration, environment, but it's too complex. Let's put aside and take it simply, I'm right, you're wrong. I can decide, you cannot decide, and so on and so on. So just in order to measure also what is the huge discrepancy between leading speeches and debates by knowing what it's about and the risks of claiming something, not because we are weaker, our ideology is weaker as the dominating and so on and so on. And while this talking about things on what we have nothing to say, because it's just names. Without such journey, I will say, or without such explorations, environment, climate change are just names, either for ecologists or for negationists, you know? Names that do not correspond to something, because if you try to adapt that name, work it out by science, work it out by 2 centuries, when not 5 centuries of science, to the thing you can observe, you're always wrong. Okay? That is what's opened our practical, societal, political, educational part of our course that will begin tomorrow. Okay?
Do we have any questions?
Yes.
I just have an observation. So, to a certain extent, this also. Why is that Occam's razor argument, right?
I will take it as that Kant really help us to take the razor Occam as an orientating rule, but not as an ontological procedure. Okay? Entia praeter necessitatem non sunt multiplicanda. But here we have a need, a necessity that is not because I will talk to about angel, and angel cannot be understood by logic, cannot talk about angel. Okay? Now something imposes to us the need to multiplicate. This is very different, because reductionist point of view as the project of United Science, and I will say, accepting from a version of many words in modern metaphysics, today analytical ontology, reductionist, is a Ockhamistic, Scotistic one. There is, the terms as the same, and even the context by which the ontology is led is the same, okay? So, they have too many to say to naive students that are more precious, no, there is sort of this kind of doing ontology and metaphysics. I am very sympathetic with Occam, because we is not to multiplicate when we have not the need of, but then we have not a personal need. There is sort of epistemical one. So if you take to an Occamist, okay, I do not multiplicate, but how many information on the phenomenon I lost? That is another kind of question. So.
I think it also emanates from that need of, simplification that you were talking about. Right? Trying to simplify things and trying to see that what's the first principle of things. Trying to go to the first principle and account for every existing entity through that principle, which is no longer possible for if we consider emergentism in that way.
Can you repeat the question, please?
No, it's not a question.
No, the problem is, I'm
not an enemy of simplification, but we have not to be, because simplification leads to many procedures that make the life easier, okay? But the problem is, till a certain point, simplification is useful. At a certain point, becomes to be stupid, and at a certain other point, becomes to be dangerous. Okay? If I have to ski in a black piste, okay, on the snow, and I say, well, this is simply, I will go direct to die. Okay? So just in order to rethink the ball falling down and so on and so on. So nothing against simplification, but just measure the step by which simplification shifts to be useful or practically useful to stupid and become even dangerous. Okay? Dangerous not only, for example, like simplification of brain as computer machine, not only simplification dangerous from political point of view, but also from our conception of the human. Okay? There is simplification, like Ockhamism, as I take, if you will, the Kantian version of the thing, because even Kant names that, but just an orientative rule in order to lead our practice of determination. Okay? There cannot be now an ontological feature of the word. The word, because in one, we follow, so we have emergentism and we have reductionism. If we radicalize reductionism, this is a very, very rational stance in context. This is measured. This is from people that know what they say, and so on and on. From the public sphere, okay, is simplism, okay? And politically spoken is, don't worry, it's everything. We will provide to give you something that helps to solve the problem, and everything is in order, okay? That is when we go, let's be very objective, when we go from emergentism to the superstition of public sphere, everything is animated. The heart is a sort of general soul, and so on and so on. There is derives, or there is a very, very dangerous derivation of such position token ontologically in the public sphere. You know? So if you think at the contrary, there are just orientative rule, and you can shift among that in order to calibrate your action, your policy, and so on and so on. If I, for example, let's take an example that we take tomorrow. If you take the very complicated system of a multicultural society at that level, that is, as it was a meta-ontological connex 1, that has a very shape of networking, its own topological space, its own matrix. Then we have to do with qualitative and quantitative and so on and so on. It's a bit complicated. Or if I take these two, it's a very different kind, because here I lost many information of the complexity of the thing, and I think brutal, and I can adopt brutal policy that let not only the complex system not proliferate, but by unresilience be destroyed. You know? If I think, but even not just for left arguments, if I take in management school is complexity thinking, Maslow pyramid, and so on are adopted also for management. If I take Fordistically, well, a la Ford, Taylor, an enterprise as a machine, let's consider Charlie Chaplin modern times, okay? And if I take a very, very good policy on human resources, on creativity, of well-being of employers, and so on, it's very different kind, okay? At one level, I have a networked, internet-connected elements, and so on. I'm sure it's very simply, but how much information and resilience I will lose in the future if, for example, I don't take that level as the pertinent level in order to structure or restructure or let evolve my enterprise. You know? That's the example we made about the fabric that go out product, but the world around changes, and then the products are nothing, cannot longer be sold because the world has changed. The complexity world came into the simplistic view, destroyed it or erased it, because is the work on this reality is not still resilient. So it's not just leftist approaches, it's even the management approach, okay? So how many laws we have, or how high the risk can be to take the thing simplistically instead of a bit more complex. You have to do also with risk management, but so no, just okay.
It's a clarification.
So if we come to realize that M2 is a kind of M2 is a kind of M2 is a matrix of a particular node which is similar to M1, then, and in that case it's an amplification. So then what we also come to realize that the whole G2 and topology 2 itself is same as G1 and topology 2.
No, we can.
That the transformation occurring between the graph 1 and the graph 2 correspond to the transformation of their associate topologies, because I can transform by morphism a graph in a topological space, or place the elements of the graph in a topological space. By what we said about model verification, that topological space being a sort of parts of a theory must be validated by metrics, and then I associate M1. So the transformation of that correspond to transformation of that, and then correspond even to transformation or implementation of the metrics. For example, I can here have just one metric of model verification. I have here 4 parameters of model verification. That makes the things difficult, more difficult. But if you know what it's about, you can also measure the risk in order to take the first and the second model in order to structure something. There is a sort of grammar I just presented, because without presentation we don't have, just a grammar given by category theory, okay? Morphism, functors, and so on and so on. I cannot explain it. Okay. So, it was a very huge menu or a huge meal, and tomorrow we will descend to the landscape of concrete problems.
Tomorrow we meet SL1, 212. I'll write in the see you tomorrow.